Imagine for a second that you're in charge of a construction crew, right? And you're tasked with repairing this massive, highly complex suspension bridge.
Okay, I can picture that.
You've got all the materials, you've got the blueprints, but there is a major catch. Your crew can only do the heavy lifting, like the actual structural repairs, when the traffic on the bridge comes to a complete and total stop.
Right, which isn't very often.
Exactly. If the cars keep driving, the workers just stand on the sidelines, basically watching the cracks in the concrete get wider. And that exact same scenario is happening inside your body every time you lose sleep.
Especially in one of the most vital yet consistently ignored structures, which is the pelvic floor.
Yes. Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the surprising, kind of hidden, and highly impactful link between sleep deprivation and pelvic floor recovery.
And we have a really fantastic stack of sources for this one. We're looking at clinical physical therapy guides, urology department research, sleep science, and some deep endocrinology studies.
Yeah, it's a wide range. We're looking at everything from like the physical mechanics of postpartum healing to the hormonal shifts of menopause and how all of that intersects with what happens when your head hits the pillow. So, okay, let's unpack this. We all know we need sleep to function on a basic level.
Sure, just to get through the day.
Right, but the real mystery here is how missing just a few hours of shut-eye directly sabotages the recovery of the muscles that support, well, our most essential daily functions.
Well, to understand that connection, we kind of have to look at the underlying architecture of muscle recovery itself, completely separate from the pelvic floor, just how your body heals any tissue. Really.
Okay, so the general blueprint for healing.
Exactly, because most people assume that when you exercise or, when you're actively doing physical therapy, you're building muscle.
Mm.
But biologically, you're doing the exact opposite. You're breaking it down.
Right, because you're creating those microscopic tears in the muscle fibers. That makes sense. You're placing stress on the tissue to force it to adapt.
Yeah, but the actual growth, the repair phase, that happens almost exclusively when you are unconscious. Specifically, it happens during deep, slow-wave sleep. Scientists call this NREM stage 3.
NREM stage 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And during this specific phase, your brain waves slow down dramatically, and your pituitary gland releases these massive concentrated pulses of growth hormone, or GH. So going back to the bridge metaphor, slow-wave sleep is the only time the traffic actually stops.
Yes. And growth hormone is the night shift construction crew finally clocking in to do the actual structural work. It orchestrates the repair of those micro tears.
But I have a question about how this interacts with stress, because we always hear that a lack of sleep causes stress and, spikes your cortisol.
It absolutely does.
Right. So if my body is pumping cortisol to keep me awake and alert, wouldn't that actually increase my heart rate and push more blood flow to my muscles? And shouldn't that extra blood flush out toxins and actually speed up healing? Why does stress halt the repair? That is a really logical assumption, actually. But the body's priority system just works differently. When cortisol spikes from lack of sleep, your nervous system registers a threat.
Like it thinks I'm being chased by a bear?
Basically, yeah. It assumes you are awake because you are in literal danger. And in a state of danger, the body diverts resources away from long-term projects like repairing microtears and redirects that energy toward immediate survival.
Oh, wow. So the blood flow goes to the wrong places.
Exactly. It gets routed to your major limbs so you can run or fight, not to the deep cellular repair mechanisms. And at the same time, this survival mode actively suppresses the release of both testosterone and growth hormone.
That's a huge shift in the body's chemistry.
It is. It shifts you into a catabolic state, which is a muscle-wasting, breaking down state, rather than the anabolic, building up state that you need for healing.
Okay, I can see how chronic sleep loss over, years would do serious damage. But what if someone is just having a rough week? Can just one single bad night really make a measurable difference in muscle recovery?
What's fascinating here is just how fast that happens. The research from the University of Texas Medical Branch, the UTMB study in our stack, illustrates this perfectly.
What did they find?
They took healthy young adults and subjected them to just one single night of total sleep deprivation. And the next day, they measured their hormonal profiles and their muscle protein synthesis.
Wait, just one night?
Just one night. And postprandial muscle protein synthesis, which is basically the body's ability to use the protein you eat to repair muscle, dropped by 18%.
An 18% drop in a single day. That is a massive loss of efficiency for your body.
It's huge. And furthermore, their testosterone levels dropped by 24% and their cortisol spiked by 21%.
So it's not a slow, gradual decline over a stressful month.
No, not at all. It instantly creates this pro-catabolic environment that literally halts cellular repair dead in its tracks.
Well, so what does this all mean when we apply this biological reality directly to the pelvic floor? Because the stakes seem even higher there.
They are. Because the pelvic floor isn't just a standard linear muscle like a bicep or a quad. You can't just rest it by sitting on the couch.
Right. It's constantly working.
Yeah, the structure is incredibly dynamic. It's this intricate hammock made of various intersecting muscles and vital connective tissues like the endopelvic fascia.
And it's holding up practically everything.
Exactly. It has the monumental job of supporting the weight of the bladder, the uterus, and the rectum against gravity all day long, while simultaneously controlling your urinary and bowel functions.
So consider the 2 times in a woman's life when this hammock requires the most extensive repairs: postpartum recovery and menopause. I mean, during the postpartum period, the trauma to the area is pretty obvious. The body has to physically heal tissues that have been severely stretched or torn.
And beyond the physical tearing, there is a chaotic hormonal environment to navigate too. After childbirth, you have this massive drop in estrogen and progesterone.
Combined with a huge spike in prolactin for breastfeeding, right?
Exactly. So the mechanical trauma, combined with this hormonal crash, means the demand for that deep sleep night shift construction crew is just at an all-time high.
And then you have menopause, where the trauma isn't from a single event like childbirth, but from a fundamental shift in the body's chemistry. Our sources detail how the steep drop in estrogen during menopause causes profound physical changes to the connective tissue itself.
Right, because estrogen is absolutely crucial for maintaining the elasticity of tissues. When estrogen levels plummet, the vaginal mucosa physically thins out.
Which causes a lot of discomfort.
It does. And more importantly, the fibroblasts, which are the specific cells responsible for producing fresh collagen in your connective tissue, they actually go dormant.
Oh, wow. They just stop working.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Because they stop producing new hydrated collagen, the existing collagen and fibers fuse together. They dry out and lose their elasticity.
Like a kitchen sponge that's just been left on the counter to dry out.
That is the perfect analogy. So in both of these life stages, repairing this complex structure requires a highly optimized healing environment.
But a new mother is waking up every 2 hours to feed a newborn. And someone going through menopause is often dealing with severe night sweats and insomnia. So they simply aren't getting those continuous hours of deep NREM stage 3 sleep.
Which means the pituitary gland isn't releasing those growth hormone pulses.
And the cortisol levels just remain artificially elevated. Which is terrible because the pelvic floor is uniquely vulnerable to stress. Like when you are stressed, you subconsciously clench your jaw, right?
Yeah.
Your shoulders hike up and your pelvic floor tightens.
Exactly. High cortisol keeps those pelvic muscles on high alert. It creates a constant stream of stress hormones that literally prevents the tissue from relaxing. The muscles become totally rigid and tense.
So it's basically like a clenched fist that the brain has forgotten how to unclench.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
If the tissue is stuck in a state of high tension, trying to do physical therapy or natural healing just seems incredibly difficult. You're trying to rehabilitate a structure in a biochemical environment that is actively fighting the healing process.
It is an uphill battle, for sure. But as we dig deeper into the sources, the narrative takes an even more difficult turn.
Right, because it's not just that poor sleep hurts the pelvic floor. The sources reveal this brutal bidirectional relationship. A dysfunctional pelvic floor actively destroys your ability to sleep.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanical failures in the pelvis create direct neurological barriers to sleep.
How so?
Let's look at a specific structural issue detailed in the clinical sources called a cystocele. It's more commonly known as a dropped bladder. This happens when the supportive hammock of the pelvic floor weakens and the bladder physically bulges into the vaginal wall.
Okay, but how does a structural bulge in the vagina translate to losing sleep? Like structurally?
Because that structural shift creates a physical kink in the urethra. Imagine a garden hose that has a sharp bend in it. When you turn on the water, it trickles out, but it doesn't flow freely, right?
Right, you get terrible water pressure.
Yeah. So when someone with a cystocele tries to empty their bladder, that kink prevents them from getting all the fluid out. This leaves trapped residual urine just sitting inside the bladder.
And that trapped liquid places continuous mechanical pressure on the bladder wall.
Exactly. The walls are being stretched.
So they're sending continuous nerve signals up to the brain saying, hey, I'm full, we need to empty. Even if you are completely exhausted and your brain desperately wants to sleep, it's receiving a constant blaring alarm bell from your pelvis.
Yes. It's not just a matter of having drank too much water before bed. The brain is detecting genuine structural stress and refusing to let you sleep deeply because it thinks there's an urgent biological need to address.
It's like a broken car alarm that keeps going off in the middle of the night, which leads to nocturia, right? Waking up multiple times a night to urinate.
Exactly. And every time you wake up, you shatter your sleep architecture. You completely prevent yourself from reaching that NREM stage 3 phase where the healing actually occurs.
The phase where the construction crew is supposed to be working.
Right. But the bladder is really only one part of the problem. Abnormal tension in the endopelvic fascia, the connective tissue we discussed, also acts as an alarm bell.
Because fascia is packed with nerve endings, isn't it?
It is highly innervated. So when it becomes chronically tight or fused, it keeps your autonomic nervous system in a state of low-grade physiological stress.
Yeah.
Your brain interprets this localized structural tension in your pelvis as a systemic threat to your overall safety.
Which keeps you out of slow-wave sleep, meaning no growth hormone is released, meaning the fascia doesn't heal, meaning it stays tense, the loop just constantly feeds itself.
It really does.
And this perfectly explains a really brutal phenomenon highlighted in the sources, the 2 to 3 a.m. wake-up. I have always wondered why people dealing with stress or pain always seem to wake up at that exact hour, rather than, say, midnight or 4 a.m. What is the biology behind that?
It comes down to our natural circadian rhythms. In a healthy 24-hour cycle, your body's cortisol levels are at their absolute lowest around midnight.
Okay, so that's the baseline.
Right. Then, as part of your natural biology, cortisol begins a slow, gentle rise around 2 or 3 a.m. This is basically the body's internal sunrise, slowly preparing your systems to wake up a few hours later.
But if you are trapped in this vicious cycle, your baseline cortisol is already elevated before you even go to sleep. You went to bed stressed or in pain or with chronic fascial tension.
Exactly the problem. Because your baseline is already so high, that natural 2 a.m. cortisol bump doesn't just gently prepare you to wake up, it pushes your total cortisol levels over a critical threshold.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it basically trips the wire of your sympathetic nervous system, launching you into full fight-or-flight mode. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure goes up, and you are suddenly wide awake in the dark at 3 a.m.
And at that point, it feels biologically impossible to fall back asleep because your body is flooded with the exact same chemicals it would use to run from a predator.
Precisely. You can't expect the pelvic tissues to heal when the structural failure of those tissues is the very thing preventing the biological process required for healing.
And the sources also point out that conditions like sleep apnea complicate this even further, because sleep apnea causes you to stop breathing momentarily, which fragments your sleep and causes drops in oxygen. But wait, how does a breathing issue in your throat affect the muscles down in your pelvis?
Through intra-abdominal pressure. Every single time you struggle for breath during an apnea episode, your diaphragm forcefully bears down.
Oh, wow. So it pushes all that pressure downwards.
Yes. It pushes a tremendous amount of downward pressure directly onto your pelvic floor. So not only is the sleep apnea preventing slow-wave sleep, but it's also forcing the pelvic hammock to absorb extra weight and mechanical strain all night long.
It's structural trauma disguised as a sleep disorder.
It really is.
So the pelvic floor needs sleep to heal, but a broken pelvic floor prevents you from sleeping. And other sleep disorders actively damage the pelvic floor. It's a huge mess. So to break this loop, we have to look at the actionable solutions provided by the clinical sources.
Right, because there is a very specific blueprint for getting out of this.
And the first major intervention requires a reality check, doesn't it, regarding the timeline of recovery?
It does. The traditional postnatal pathway often centers around a standard 6-week checkup, which leads many people to believe they should be fully healed by then. But the clinical data shows that true functional recovery of the pelvic floor and abdominal wall actually takes between 6 to 12 months.
That reframing alone is huge. Because if you're at 8 weeks or even 12 weeks postpartum and you're still experiencing pain, tension, or exhaustion, you aren't failing at recovery. You're just in the early stages of a year-long project.
Exactly. And the evidence strongly points to supervised, consistent pelvic floor muscle training as a cornerstone of that project.
Like Kegels.
Yes, but more specific.
Yeah.
A standard prescription involves a calculated mix of slow and fast contractions to train different muscle fibers. So you might do a slow lift and hold for 10 seconds to build endurance, followed by a complete release for 10 seconds.
The release is just as important as the contraction.
Exactly. And then you follow that with a series of fast, quick lifts to train coordination. Crucially, this training needs to be maintained for 16 weeks or more before you can accurately judge its effectiveness.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Based on what we've unpacked about the biology of sleep, healing the pelvic floor isn't just about doing Kegels on your desk while you check emails.
No, not at all.
Because you can do physical contractions all day long, but if your cortisol is sky high at night and your brain is locked out of NREM stage 3 sleep, you are essentially trying to build a brick wall without any cement.
That is a great way to put it. To actually heal the structure, you have to actively set the stage for your hormones to do their job at night. Addressing the nighttime environment is the missing piece of the puzzle.
And the sources detail specific mechanical tactics you can use to lower tension before bed. Sleep positioning is a surprisingly effective tool, right?
It is incredibly effective. If you sleep on your side, simply placing a thick pillow between your knees physically changes the angle of your femur.
The thigh bone.
Right. This slight adjustment in the angle of your leg bones slacks the obturator internus muscle and takes immediate mechanical tension off the pelvic floor muscles.
And what if you sleep on your back?
If you sleep on your back, putting a pillow under your knees achieves a very similar release.
It's just a simple geometric change that takes the pressure off the bridge cables so they aren't pulled taut all night long. The sources also heavily emphasize nervous system regulation right before bed, specifically through a technique called 360 breathing. How does taking deep breaths actually affect the pelvic floor mechanically?
Well, it works by utilizing your diaphragm. When you practice 360 breathing, which means inhaling deeply, so your rib cage expands outward in all directions, front, back, and sides, your diaphragm physically pushes downward into your abdominal cavity.
So it's not just breathing into your chest?
No, it's deep belly breathing. This downward motion gently pushes your internal organs against the pelvic floor, providing a natural mechanical stretch to the tissues.
Oh, that makes sense.
And more importantly, this deep diaphragmatic movement directly stimulates the vagus nerve.
Which acts as the master brake pedal for the nervous system.
Precisely. By physically manipulating the diaphragm, you are manually sending a signal to your brain that you are safe, which lowers cortisol and actively encourages the pelvic floor to drop and relax before you fall asleep.
Okay, what about fluid intake? Managing that is another practical mechanical fix, right?
Yes, you obviously need to stay fully hydrated during the day for tissue health, but the clinical recommendation is to severely limit fluid intake 2 to 3 hours before bed.
Just to keep the bladder empty.
Right. This simple timing adjustment ensures your bladder is relatively empty when you go to sleep. So even if you have a slight cystocele, minimizing the volume of liquid reduces the physical stretch on the bladder wall, which in turn silences the nerve signals that cause nocturia.
Okay, but what about the physical tension that is already locked into the connective tissue? If the collagen has fused together because of menopause or trauma, breathing and pillows might not be enough to just break it apart.
That is very true. And that is where therapeutic interventions like myofascial release and trigger point therapy become essential.
Fascia is like that thin, tough, silvery skin you see on a raw chicken breast.
That's a really good visual, yes.
Yeah.
When it gets tight, it basically binds up everything around it. A specialized physical therapist can use their hands to physically manipulate the tissue, manually breaking up those cross-linked collagen fibers.
So they're physically releasing the tension in the muscles.
Exactly. And by removing the localized physical tension, you eliminate the sensory alarm bells that prevent comfortable sleep.
So by combining the physical rehabilitation of the muscles during the day with strict intentional sleep hygiene and nervous system calming at night, you start to slowly lower your baseline cortisol.
Yes, it's a two-pronged approach. And when that baseline cortisol finally drops, the brain feels safe enough to cross the threshold into deep, slow-wave sleep.
And when you hit that deep sleep, the pituitary gland just opens the floodgates. The growth hormone pours out, and the biological construction crew finally gets to work repairing the torn tissues, hydrating the thin mucosa, and rebuilding the strained fascia.
It all comes together. The restorative sleep accelerates the structural healing, and the structural healing removes the neurological barriers to sleep. The two forces finally begin to support each other instead of fighting.
To quickly summarize the journey we've taken through these sources today, we began by uncovering how deep sleep dictates our body's entire hormonal healing environment. specifically through that balance of growth hormone and cortisol.
Right. And we explored how a lack of sleep creates a high cortisol trap that keeps pelvic muscles locked in tension, rendering physical recovery incredibly difficult.
We then examine the bidirectional nature of this problem, where structural pelvic issues like a dropped bladder kinking the urethra or tight fascia triggering the nervous system create mechanical alarms that actively prevent the brain from sleeping, often leading to that brutal 3 a.m. fight or flight response.
And finally, we outlined how resolving those structural issues through targeted physical therapy, proper sleep positioning, and nervous system regulation is just a mandatory step in achieving restorative sleep.
For you listening, we strongly encourage you to reflect on your own sleep patterns. If you are experiencing lingering pelvic aches, unexplained daytime fatigue, or if you consistently find yourself waking up at 3 a.m. with a racing heart, it is vital to consider that this might not just be generalized stress or a normal part of getting older.
No, it might actually be a sign of incomplete structural recovery in your pelvis. Listen to what your body is signaling in the middle of the night.
It is incredibly empowering to realize that these frustrating issues are biomechanically connected, and more importantly, that there are actionable ways to treat them. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought drawn directly from the research we reviewed today.
Let's hear it.
We established that the pelvic floor is intimately linked to the autonomic nervous system, which is the exact same neurological system that regulates your sleep-wake cycle itself. This raises a genuinely fascinating question to ponder as you go about your day. If your pelvic floor is holding chronic, unresolved tension, perhaps from childbirth years ago, from menopausal changes, or just from daily stress, is it acting like a physical alarm bell that is constantly, invisibly telling your brain's master clock to stay awake? We almost always think of insomnia as a brain problem, like a mental stress issue or a chemical imbalance.
Right, a top-down problem.
Exactly. But could the secret to curing certain types of stubborn, unexplainable insomnia literally start from the bottom up? Could the key to finally getting a good night's sleep be physically locked inside the muscles and fascia of your pelvic floor? It turns out if you want to rebuild the bridge, you have to look very closely at exactly what is keeping the traffic moving. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the research. We will catch you next time.